The sun had just begun to melt into the horizon, painting the dusty plains gold, when Levi came riding in from the north pasture. He was tired, drenched in sweat, but that was nothing new to a man who had spent his life taming the land. The ranch had been in his family for 3 generations, and if there was one thing Levi knew better than anything else, it was hard work. He swung down from his horse and was about to head to the barn when he heard a voice, soft, trembling, and unfamiliar. "You've paid for me, just do it." Levi froze. The words cut through the evening air like a whip. He turned, his eyes narrowing, and saw her standing by the old wagon, a woman in a pale dress, clutching the fabric as if it were the only thing holding her together. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with tangled hair that had clearly seen a long journey. There was dust on her face, but beneath it, her eyes burned with both fear and something deeper, something like defiance. "I didn't pay for you," Levi said finally, his voice low but steady. "I paid your debt. There's a difference." Her chin trembled. "But that means I belong to you now, doesn't it?" Levi felt something hard twist in his chest. He'd been to the auction because a piece of land bordering his ranch was being put up for lease. But instead of just land, the sheriff had announced there was a special case, a woman who had been indentured to pay off her late father's gambling debts. She'd been standing there under the scorching sun like property, her wrists tied loosely, her dignity held together by a thread. And Levi, against every instinct, had stepped forward and placed the winning bid. "You don't belong to me," he said finally. "You're free to go if you want. But you've got nowhere safe to run tonight. So stay. Rest. Eat." Her lips parted. It wasn't the answer she expected. "Why would you do that?" "Because I've seen too many good people broken by bad men," he said simply. For a moment, silence fell between them. The wind whispered through the mesquite trees, carrying the scent of dry earth. She lowered her gaze. "I don't even know your name." "Levi." "And mine's Claire," she said, though her voice trembled on the last syllable as if the name had been taken from her too many times before. Levi motioned toward the house. "There's stew on the stove. Come on before the coyotes beat us to it." She hesitated but followed, the hem of her dress brushing against the dirt. Inside the farmhouse, everything was warm, worn, and quiet. The scent of wood smoke and beef stew filled the air. Claire stood near the doorway like a bird on the edge of a cage, unsure whether to trust the open air or not. Levi ladled stew into a bowl and pushed it toward her. "Eat." She stared at it, then at him. "You're not like the others." He didn't respond. She picked up the spoon with shaking hands and began to eat as if she hadn't tasted food in days. Watching her, Levi felt something he hadn't in years, not pity, but a fierce, quiet resolve. Later, as night wrapped around the ranch, Claire sat on the porch while Levi worked on fixing a fence rail. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "Why would you save someone like me?" Levi paused. "Because someone once saved me." She turned to him, confusion flickering in her eyes. He set down the hammer. "I grew up in a world that chewed up anyone who was weak. When I was 16, my old man died, and the bank was ready to take everything. But one neighbor stepped in and gave me a chance. Not because he had to. Because he could. That's all I'm doing for you, Claire." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back stubbornly. "You think this is that simple? Men don't just help women like me." Levi met her gaze, steady as a mountain. "Then maybe it's time someone did." She looked away, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like running. The next few weeks were unlike anything Claire had known. The ranch moved to its own rhythm, sunrise, work, sunset, silence. Levi never touched her. Never demanded anything. Instead, he gave her small jobs, feeding the horses, gathering eggs, fixing the garden fence. At first, she did it because she didn't know where else to go. But slowly, something shifted. She began to want to help. She learned how to ride a horse again, how to laugh softly at the ranch dog chasing chickens. How to breathe without fear tightening her chest. But the world outside didn't forget. One dusty afternoon, 2 men rode up the dirt road, the same kind of men who had sold her away. She recognized their faces instantly. Her stomach dropped. Levi was in the barn when he heard the commotion. He stepped out, his hat low over his eyes. Afternoon, one of the men drawled. We've come to collect what's ours. She's not yours, Levi said calmly. The other man spat on the ground. You paid her debt. Doesn't mean she's free. She's property. Ours. Claire stood on the porch, every muscle screaming for her to run, but something held her still. Maybe it was Levi's voice. Maybe it was the way he stood, broad and unshaken. You're not taking her, Levi said. The men laughed. One reached for his holster. Levi didn't flinch. You pull that gun, you better not miss. The tension cracked through the air like thunder. Then, unexpectedly, Claire stepped forward. I'm not going with you. Their eyes snapped to her. For years, she'd been silent, compliant. But not now. I belong to no one. Not anymore. You'll regret that, girl, the men snarled. No, Levi said, stepping in front of her. She won't. It happened fast, a scuffle, a warning shot, a horse spooked. Levi moved like a man who had drawn lines in the sand long ago. In the end, the men rode off, cursing into the wind. Claire was shaking when Levi turned to her. She expected him to scold her, to tell her she'd been reckless. But instead, he just nodded. You did good. She stared at him, breathless. You protected me. He shook his head slowly. No, Claire. You protected yourself. I just made sure no one got in your way. For a long moment, the night was still. Then, without warning, she whispered, You've paid for me, just do it. But this time her voice was different, not a plea, but a challenge to fate itself. Levi stepped closer, his voice steady. I didn't buy you. I gave you your freedom. What you do with it is your choice. Claire swallowed hard. She had expected chains. Instead, she found something far more terrifying, hope. And that night, beneath the stars, she chose to stay. Not because she had to. But because for the first time in her life, she wanted to. Months later, the ranch was no longer just Levi's, it was theirs. Claire walked with her head high, her laughter echoing across the fields. She wasn't a prisoner of anyone's choices anymore. And Levi. He learned that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting battles alone, but in building something worth fighting for. As the sun set once again over the wide, wild land, Claire whispered, Thank you for not giving up on me. Levi tipped his hat with a quiet smile. You never needed saving, Claire. You just needed someone to remind you you're free.